couple of different education bills heard this week, one of them in your government reform committee that addresses virtual education here in Missouri.
Yes, we actually have passed virtual education bills in the past, and one of the things that has been, it's actually been in the courts even, has been the problem that some parents have had when they wanted to engage in full-time virtual. I think it's primarily the full-time virtual that has been the problem. There's two kind of approaches to virtual. One is the course access. That's where, for example, our rural schools can have access to courses that they might not be able to provide because of a shortage of sufficient pupils to justify a teacher in a classroom, and they could get those courses online from either other public schools or the private sector. But then there's also full-time virtual for whatever reason, whether it's a student that just simply doesn't fit into the collectivism, or whether it's a student that maybe has special needs and it's difficult for them to be at school, or even health issues where they can't be exposed maybe to community, that can take full-time virtual and be fully educated in their home via the internet. The difficulty has been for some parents when they have tried to apply and take virtual, that some of the districts put barriers in their way that, whether intentionally or not, appeared to be intentional, appeared to be a deliberate attempt to keep them from being able to engage in that virtual and still remain in the district. And I won't go into a lot of details, but it's a bill that tries to address that and tries to streamline that process so that it's a little bit easier for parents to both understand it and then to actually place their child, their student, in full-time virtual education when that's what they enjoy. An example of what seemed to be a little bit egregious to me was one school district that told the parent, you can enroll in this virtual school, but you'll have to take all your courses in the building with other students, which in many ways completely defeats the purpose. So to open that door to parents and give them that choice of virtual, but then I think felt a little bit like maybe some of the districts were deliberately attempting to sidestep that legislation. And so he has come back with a bill to try to repair that and make sure parents know that really is a legitimate choice that they can make, and that the district should not be able to put unreasonable barriers in their way.
Along these same lines of education in this case, another bill that deals with reading. I think this is at least similar to a bill you've had the last several years.
It is. I think 3 years ago I filed a bill that was very similar to it. It brings a structured learning program into reading. It recognizes the bill for the last couple of years, the bill was heard in education. And as you know, bills get refined somewhat every year. We usually do make small improvements, sometimes large improvements, but the bill fundamentally is much similar to what it was 3 years ago. And it's reflective of what some states have had exceptional success when applying this type of reading environment. It recognizes that reading is the most critical skill that we can introduce in education, and that you learn to read so that you can learn everything else by reading. There are measures, there are certain structures that would have to be imposed, there are certain additional helps that would have to be supplied if children were not reading at grade level. Its goal is to be sure that every child in Missouri is reading at grade level and is capable of continuing that learning mindset and enjoy a learning environment as long as they live. We have a lot of evidence that shows us that, I think the number that was reported in the hearing was something like 70% of the men and women in our prisons have difficulty reading or cannot read at all. It's a real telling statistic. If we do not teach our students to read, we've put many of them on a path that none of us would like to see. Most of the testimony was from parents and students in support of the bill. There were some schools who testified against the bill. They feel like that they're already doing what they need to do, and they're afraid that the language in the bill would interfere with what they're doing. But we can't escape the fact that only about 35% of Missouri students are reading at grade level. One of the questions that was asked of some of the witnesses is, at what point do you decide to do something different whenever we're not seeing the kind of outputs that we really want to see in Missouri?
We have seen over the last couple of years especially another big push, in addition to some of the pushes from the last decade, in terms of getting broadband here in Missouri. It looks like we're moving a little bit closer to getting broadband where it needs to be, and that's in the most rural parts of the state.
That's right. That's the area least served. And we have a lot of Missourians who have access to high-speed internet. In terms of numbers, the numbers look pretty good, but we do have a large number of rural areas where, if you measure this the way the national measure or even legislatively relatively now the measurements that we have established by statute in Missouri, we have a lot of rural areas that don't have, quote, high-speed internet, end quote. I have internet. I have access to the internet, and it is high speed compared to dial-up, but it's about a maximum of about 1.5 megabyte, and that is very slow in today's world, but it's classified as high-speed internet, except not by statute. By statute, you have to be around 25 to be a high-speed internet. So that's some of the classification issues that come up whenever we're trying to define these areas of unserved or underserved. And this was a bill that allowed communities to join if they wanted to join in engaging internet companies. It would be private sector companies. It didn't encourage the public sector to compete with the private sector, but it did allow some of our small communities to join together in engaging in internet services, where today, absent that legislation, they're not able to do that. So it gives a little bit more of power of numbers to try to engage, and also that will help some of these internet companies by making it more profitable for them to come into some of these rural areas where their customer base is relatively small, and so it is an expensive operation to bring internet in. Any kind of measure like that where we are removing barriers to commerce, I think, are very good for any venture, but particularly right now in that area of high-speed internet and trying to get it to rural areas where we currently are not served.